Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back from the coffee break. Welcome to Crop Protection, Science-Based Facts, Fact-Based Policy. You are in this conversation, you are in this discussion. We can only do so much on the panel, so we are opening up the room for you to have that conversation back and forth. Traditionally, that happens at the end. If you've got a burning question, why should you have to wait to the end? We are going rogue. Microphones, one in this aisle, one in this aisle. Thank you very much. Lights up so we can see our beautiful audience. Thank you very much. There you go. We can see you. If during this conversation, this discussion, you have a point to make, you do not have to wait to the last 5 minutes of our 1 hour. You can make it. Just make sure you catch the attention of the microphone. There's one here, red, and there's one here, blue. They won't throw it all the way over to you. They will walk over quite nicely and just give it a little pat. No danger involved. If you look at your program, on page 16, at the bottom of the page, there is so much awesomeness, I'm not even going to read it out. These are your panelists. I asked them, what would you want to say to our audience that makes you so relevant to our 1 hour conversation? Sophie, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Wow, what a question to open this. So I used to be someone who was defending science and evidence as a professional activity. I spend a lot of time defending biotechnology and GMOs. And I've recently, about 5 months ago, moved to the other side, one might say. I'm now working for an organization that promotes agroecology, organic farming, and that more concretely connects consumers directly with organic farmers in their neighborhoods.
That's a great start. I love that. That was a beautiful start. Thank you, Sophie. Glad you're here. Hello, Alan.
Hello.
And?
Now me.
What are you bringing to the table? The couch.
Okay, I'm an agricultural economist. I've spent my entire career around European agricultural policy. I only know a bit about Europe. I don't know a massive amount about crop protection and pesticides. That's why I'm here. My perception is that nobody's happy with the world as it is in dealing with crop protection. Farmers can see their toolboxes eroding. The companies say it's getting more and more expensive, unpredictable, takes too long to get products to market. The environmentalists are saying biodiversity is disappearing off the face of the earth at an alarming rate. We're not dealing with it fast enough. Consumers are confused by the competing claims of these groups, and policymakers, they don't seem to be happy either. It really struck me between the eyes that the French president felt that in his speech earlier this year on the future evolution of Europe, of European renewal, out of the big picture things that he mentioned, he said he wanted to reduce pesticide use by 50% by 2025. And to bring in new institutions to bring that about. Now, it strikes me that that's a signal that all is not well in this world. What I hope to do is to join the discussion and push these debates, I hope, towards a better conclusion.
When I saw Klaus early on this afternoon, I said, hello, Klaus, how was your day? What did you say back to me, Klaus?
I said the usual madness. And that is exactly what it is. Alan has described it very well, the extremely polarized views among stakeholders on pesticides that I have to deal with every day in my job as the regulator who is responsible for proposing the Commission decisions on whether or not to approve active substances based on the scientific assessments made by EFSA and the member states. So I'm right in the heart of this interface between science and policy. Mm-hmm. And like Sophie, it's hard to defend science sometimes, but on the other hand, after more than 20 years in the Commission, I'm also very well aware that there are many other factors than only science that play a role in decision making.
Hubert, it's so good to have you in the conversation, but what are you going to make so juicy that people are going to think, I'm so glad he came to Ghent?
Nothing, but Nevertheless, let me introduce myself by saying that I bring three angles. First of all, the academic area where I specialize in epidemiology, which I think is relevant to our discussion. Second, I worked for the pharmaceutical industry in research and development in veterinary medicines, which is, I think, as close as you get to plant protection products. And then in 2004, I had the opportunity to join EFSA as a construction worker. And I think 2004 is important because it illustrates that at that time we were able to make a bold move, which everybody considers normal, but we took with very open arms 10 new member states. And today that is considered normal. So if Alan is worried about the future, I would say we're always worried about what has not been achieved. And of course, as Europeans, we're incapable of celebrating all the good things that we have achieved since the establishment of the European Union.
Very true.
Alan?
Yeah, that's fair game. Because we have. I mean, agricultural productivity has expanded enormously, and in a sense, most of the population doesn't have to scratch around producing its food. It can devote itself to a huge range of other things. The trouble is that we've paid a heavy price, many argue, for achieving these productivity gains. And assessing the scale of that damage. I'm talking about the damage to the environment from intensive agriculture. And it's an issue that won't go away, it can't go away. It's possibly getting worse with climate change. And we have to grip this, and we have to find a way of communicating the scale of the problem and what we're doing about it.
I think if we don't get our arms around the problem, we only have ourselves to blame. We as Europe can do as much as anybody can if we just think longer term, medium term, rather than short term, next quarter results.
It's very unusual for David to be this quiet for this long.
I'm never quiet.
David, what are you bringing to the table today?
I'm a contradiction. I'm a Canadian who specializes in European policy. I'm a philosopher who's spent the last 20 years dealing with science communication. And I'm an industry person now in the academic world. But essentially, I'm a gadfly. I go around provoking everybody who wants everything in nice, straight boxes. And I write a blog called The Riskmonger, which essentially tries to get people to think more about their biases and maybe open up their minds a bit more.
I'm thinking here, panel, plenary, crop protection products and the confidence that politicians and also the public have in them on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being very confident, 1 being this is in a dire situation. Where would you put? What would you put? 1, because?
Well, the difficulty right now is that the public is embracing Project Fear. Social media has made the public very afraid of anything that's a chemical. And the problem with something like that is that with social media, we are surrounding ourselves by people who agree with us and blocking out people who disagree. I call it the age of stupid. Not that I'm right and they're stupid, but if I surround myself by people who agree with me, how do I know I'm not the stupid one? And today, with the ability for campaigners to create this fear of chemicals, we're finding ourselves in a dangerous situation where it's hard to have policy come forward.
So to prepare for today, I went to have a chat with a couple of people from the agroecology sector.
Mm-hmm.
To get my facts straight a bit, to make sure I'm not saying things that's going to offend my new friends,
Mm-hmm.
things like that. And I've spoken to people who said we tried to have a discussion with the biotech sector, with scientists. We've given up. So it's not just that people only get people who confirm their own views. It's not just that they're in a bubble. Somehow the science community, the industry, is not allowing them to enter their bubble and to have the conversation.
I'm not so sure that it's a matter of not allowing to enter the bubble, but what I said repeatedly, and I keep saying it, is that consumers and society at large don't see any benefits in the use of pesticides. That's the core problem, in my opinion. They are not aware of that they have a useful function, unlike for medicinal products, for example, where there is huge acceptance in public and among consumers. For pesticides, it's simply not there.
I think you're underestimating the public. the people that I know, look at myself. I know what pesticides do, I know the need for it, but I do feel that the research community hasn't been looking enough at alternatives. I know that we can't have a transition to a pesticide-free agriculture from today to tomorrow, but I also see, and there's been research on this, I also see that there has been much more investment of research funds into biotech solutions and not enough investment into, for instance, agroecology. And about 30 years ago, we were at a breach and we could have gone both directions, and for some reason, we've gone one direction only. And so organic farming has lower production rates, yes. But why is that really? And what if we invested more in research? It's an open question. I'm not going to answer it, but I'm asking the question. If we had invested more in agroecology, in organic research, we might actually be much further now. We might actually be at the same level as in the system where we use a lot of pesticides. I don't know, it's an open question, but nobody can answer it. And what is frustrating to the public, to those who question pesticides, is that nobody seems to even want to have that conversation.
I want Alan to pick up on this, but first of all, Sophie, tell everybody what your new job is.
Okay, so my organization, it's an organization that started from consumers who want to have more control on their food. So they started looking for farmers in their neighborhoods to buy food directly from them so that they can check better how the food is produced. They know the farmer who produced it. They can have a relationship of trust. And you cut out all of the middle, like the retail sector and the stock markets, so that you can also guarantee that the farmer gets an honest price, because that's something that hasn't been on the table yet. It's not just environmental consequences. The socio-economic consequences of our current agricultural system are a disaster.
Alan, go ahead.
Well, I find it very difficult when people talk about, they give their views on what the public wants, because I don't think the public wants one thing. And I'm not quite sure who's this expert. I mean, I think it's interesting to look at what the public does. And the public has the option to go out and buy food that's produced in certain ways, avoiding or trying mostly to avoid the use of crop protection products, and that's organic products. And whilst that market is growing, it's had a favourable wind behind it for decades. Nobody ever says anything bad about it, and it still only takes less than 10% of the land, or maybe a bit more in the countries where it's gone furthest. That most people, in a sense, it seems to me, are behaving as though, and I think quite rightly, that they are trusting the fact that we have a regulatory system in place, and that it does look in some rigor. And if they read the appraisals of the system, they're told that it's amongst the most stringent in the world. Now, people can argue about that, but you could argue that at least a proportion of the population are not worrying about this because they're assuming that and I think probably rightly, that society is doing something about it.
Just hold that thought. Don't forget it. Mm-hmm. Hello, sir.
Yeah, my name's Alan Felsot, Washington State University. So I'm an academic for the last 41 years. I challenge what Sophie said, and maybe it's just the United States perspective, but I'll tell you it's not. So you said that the money seems to be going into biotech solutions and not what you would call agroecology solutions. So one of the courses I teach, besides pesticides, biotechnology, I teach a course called ecological pest management. That's not true what you said. If you read the literature, there's tens and tens to hundreds of papers on what we call biodiversity schemes for valuation of biocontrol organisms and conservation. And where do most of this literature come from? It's actually in Europe. But we also fund this in the United States. There's plenty of literature out there. There is no bias towards biotech research and academia. If you actually look at what's going for projects, it's all on integrated pest management, ecological pest management. This stuff is published. Europe is really good at producing this literature, and all you got to do is read it. So I don't think your perception of what is out there and being funded is actually true anymore.
It's not me saying this. This is scientific research making an analysis of what... I can give you the reference.
Hold tight a minute. You will not be on YouTube unless that red microphone is in front of your mouth. But I will just say, the gentleman said, it's not true for YouTube.
I can give you a reference of an article of a research study that looked into that. That's all I can say about it.
All right, so we have a disagreement here, and thank you for using the mics in the room. Microphones, walk around the room so people can see where you are, so if they put up their hand, that you are close to them. Let me actually go to Hubert first. Hubert and then David.
I'm most interested in discussing ways forward rather than complaining about the present or the past. And so it seems to me that pesticides are a raw material, and that has to fit in the whole use pattern. And it would seem to me that there are major opportunities for whoever wants to take the lead to follow what is happening in other industries, like the aviation industry. How much is software, how much is hardware? So I think responsible use is moving forward, as was illustrated by the previous intervention. And I think it's a massive opportunity in addressing a societal need. And I think either Europe is going to play a role in that, or like in other areas, perhaps it will be led by the US and other major economic players. And I think that's what we need to focus on, is to make sure that the pesticide use is embedded in responsible use, and it will require some major investments beyond the traditional research in chemicals per se.
I've worked 2 decades with scientists, very closely with scientists and farmers, and one thing that always gets me is when they'll say my scientists or our scientists versus their scientists. Scientists follow a method, and the method can be quite simple. You find the best way to work, and if it works via natural processes or via organic means, scientists are not going to stop it or block it because of some presupposition. And that's one of the challenges I think I have, and one of the problems I have with agroecology, because if you start from a basis that it must be natural, you then exclude possibilities like using CRISPR to develop new seed technologies, or you exclude possibilities of using glyphosate for conservation agricultural processes, no-till cover cropping. And when you start to exclude certain processes based on some artificial presupposition, you're not doing science. That's getting into religion, no matter how much your social justice theory might compensate for it in other ways.
So biopesticides is religion?
Not necessarily. If it works, it's good. Scientists will accept it. But the question is, will agroecologists accept synthetic applications, seed technologies, or use of herbicides with no-till farming and cover cropping, which will be much better for soil than tilling?
Klaus, in your job for regulating pesticides, I know that there are misconceptions that people have about what it is that you do, what it is that pesticides do, and I know you wanted to myth bust if you could. Worst case is what?
Well, I'm picking up on something that Alan said, even though it's absolutely true that when you look at the actual buying behavior today, it doesn't match what you hear in opinion polls and what we hear and what I get in communications. I mean, every day I'm swamped with mail letters from citizens, not to me, but to Mr. Juncker, the president, or to my commissioner and others. And out of these letters, you can read that there is a severe distrust into A, the science, and B, also the actual decision-making process, which is usually described as intransparent, and we don't really understand what's going on, and so forth and so on. So, talking about myth, I mean, I have one particular citizen who writes to me at least once a month, basically, not you, no, basically describing that every ill on this earth is due to glyphosate, including in her latest submission cataract operations on the eye, because glyphosate is classified as irritating to the eye. So everything is due to that. So there are so many myths out there, it's almost...
And how do you respond? Do you write back a nice letter saying, Thank you for your letter this month.
We usually write back to everybody writing to us.
What do you
Yeah.
say?
Explaining exactly how the system works, what is behind it. And on top of that, my DG has spent quite some time in developing communication material, a bit like EFSA has also done, trying to explain in layman's terms how the system works. But that, and there I agree with Sophie, in the end is not enough, because only few people will really read that. And then secondly, it doesn't overcome this general conception that why are we using pesticides at all? And there I come back to what Alan said. It's the entire system of agriculture that is in question. It's not just pesticides. Pesticides are one component of that. It's a much bigger thing that is the heart of all this dissatisfaction that you very rightly described, Alan.
Okay, can we pick?
Can I say something to that? Because this touches on something that was one of my main points in my previous job when I was trying to help researchers defend their research better. Quit the good news show. People don't buy it.
Yep.
If you say, don't worry, trust us, everything is fine, we know what we're doing, people will say, like hell you do. That's just it. So you have to be honest also where the flaws in the system are, and if you try to hide them beyond nice words and nice pictures, people just won't go for it. So basically, if you want people to believe you, you first have to show some vulnerability. You have to show that there are difficult issues, there are things that you're struggling with, and there's a trade-off. And be honest about that, and you're a long way into having a real conversation.
Let me just go to Hubert first. I'll come back to you, Alan, because I know we've got a question in the audience again. Hubert, go ahead.
Oh, well, I completely agree with showing vulnerabilities to the extent that that helps you move the science forward. And I think that's perfectly reasonable. For example, a pesticide risk assessment is a prediction about what will happen in the future. At the end of the day, as far as human safety is concerned, we pride ourselves that we don't feed it beforehand to humans to test the safety, so we actually make a prediction based on the outcomes of a rat or other model study to say that's the way what's going to happen in humans. I think it would be a major step forward if the stakeholders, and that includes, in my view, industry, were to say, look, you know, we're responsible people. We're going to co-sponsor biomonitoring of workers in the field and show you that what we say is also happening, and we're going to walk the talk. I think that would change the perception, not the next quarter when you have to talk to your shareholders, but it's going to change perception over time, and it's a long-term investment. And I think that those are the kind of initiatives that are there for grabs, because if you don't do it yourself, academicians who get a grant for 6 months or 2 years will start doing all sorts of monitoring with ill-funded or poorly funded projects, which cause you an amazing amount of problems. But I'm sorry, we have ourselves, that is government as well as industry, to blame for not stepping in that and addressing that need. And I think it's particularly important to show that we care about farmer workers, because if you take the example of glyphosate, it's non-Hodgkin's lymphoma that comes back over and over again. So it's not the consumer that eats the food, it's the guys in the field that rightly or wrongly are suggesting that there are problems with many chemicals that potentially people get exposed to, and sorry for talking so long.
Well, but I'm not sure really that's going to solve the public mistrust, because the American Health Study in the United States tested 60,000 people over 20 years, and they didn't find any evidence of non-Hodgkin's lymphoma for use of. These are people applying glyphosate. So I think people want to believe it, they will. And if there's enough people out there repeating a lot of the lies.
Do you think we are just naturally suspicious as the general public?
Well,
I'm sorry, I think the evidence is there that in agricultural populations there are certain types of cancer that are occurring at a higher rate. Whether that's due to A, B, C, X, Y, or Z, we don't have a clue, I would say, and these studies that you refer to, in my view, have not addressed it. But what you don't need to do cancer studies, you can just do biomonitoring in actual users. If people aren't carrying it ever in their blood, how on earth could they ever 30 years later propose a cancer? But in that area in particular, and there is other areas, it doesn't take a huge investment, but it shows that you care, which is one of the ways of establishing leadership and authority.
I'm going to fit Alan in, and then I hate to pause this because it's going really well, but I also wanted to bring in the audience, and I promised them they would do that. Alan, you go first, and then you sat down because you were so patient. When Alan finishes, stand right up again, okay? We'll come back to you.
Oh dear, hell may freeze over before that. My concern is that there isn't a solution to these issues we're talking about that is going to satisfy all of the public. That the public is gobbling up the food that's being produced with delight. And in fact, they're doing it so much that they're eating themselves to ill health. They're over-consuming carbohydrates, they're over-consuming fats, they're over-consuming proteins, that we don't have to produce all this food in Europe in order to satisfy them. Now, this is a path down which most people in this room don't want to go, and most farmers don't want to go, but it is conceivable that the pressures we've created to our natural resources and to our climate and our waters and so on, our biodiversity, by pumping so much food out of our agricultural system is not sustainable, and neither are the diets that it's supporting. Now, of course, I'm talking from a European perspective, and this is a global issue because we're globally connected. And I know there are other parts of the world where there's a very different story. But the point is that part of the solution is to do with consumption levels and to do with reducing waste. And in a way, Sophie, I'm absolutely unimpressed that there's no point in arguing that had we gone down the agroecological route, we could have produced 10, 12 tons per hectare of cereals and 40 tons per hectare of sugar beet. We couldn't. The nature of those systems is that they are going to operate at a lower level of productivity. I think if you want to be honest, in a sense, tell the public that and say, so in the future there'll be less food, it'll be more expensive, and you'll be paying for the environmental cost of producing it.
Well, that's going to go down well.
Well, precisely.
Thanks for your patience. Hello.
Yeah, hello there. Almost forgot my question by now, but...
I like it. Sarcasm coming to bite us.
So my name is Annemieke Vernost. I'm from the University of Manitoba in Canada. I'm Associate Dean Research of the Faculty of Agricultural and Food Sciences. So public trust is certainly something that comes to my attention quite frequently. So my question is, I think what happens within North America, perhaps also other countries or regions around the world, we have quite a bit of urbanization going on. And so my question, in addition to the social media, what you had mentioned previously in terms of creating a lot of hype, what's the role of urbanization in that there is lesser trust in basically the agricultural system, farming? I know some kids, they have literally no idea where milk comes from. And I think part of the reason why we may be dealing with public trust is because people never set a foot on the farm anymore these days.
I think everybody wants to take that, so we just go down the couches. You start, Sophie.
That's why I believe so much in this system of local agriculture and short food supply chains. And if you look at any analysis of any problem in agriculture and the solutions that are put forward there, more local agriculture is always part of it. Because of that, partially, because of the reconnecting the consumer to the producer, to the farmer, more awareness also of how difficult it is, more awareness of what the real cost is of food production, awareness, as difficult as it is, that we are paying not enough money for our food. That is a fact. Our budgets for food are much lower than they were, say, 100 years ago. So, but I also realize that, it will probably always, it's now 0.7%, it will always be rather niche, the local agriculture. But if at least we can reconnect a bit the consumers to the producers, if they know more what it actually is and what it takes, that's one of the reasons why I'm doing this now, because I really believe in the strength of that, and I've seen change happen, real change, small change, local change, but it is a growing movement. I don't know how big it can grow, but hopefully it can grow big enough for it to have an impact at political level.
Alan.
I'm pretty skeptical. It's a helpful segmentation of the market that's absolutely harmless, and it's highly beneficial, I mean, to those who want to do it. But as you've said yourself, it's always going to be a tiny corner. Most people don't know and don't care where their cereals came from. The time the cereals have been processed into bread and to pastries and so on, they're not thinking about the farmer who grew the wheat. And in a sense, there's too many things to think about. Most people are not giving a second's thought to their food, and quite rightly so, because it's actually subject to very stringent regulation in Europe. And by and large, the problem is they're overeating it rather than the way it's produced. But there are significant concerns about the sustainability of the systems we've got in place. And that's what I feel we've got to address, and it's exceedingly difficult to do that.
I think it's a communications question more than anything else. We're 3 generations now off the farm in many cases, and if you look back, we moved from an agrarian society to one where only 3% of the population in North America is growing the food for people. So it's very easy for people who've never been on a farm to think simplistic solutions like roof gardens are going to feed us all, or that if we just ban certain pesticides, it's no problem. But we're beginning to see that these complex problems are a lot harder. Difficulty is, as a communications problem, the main people who should be out there communicating are farmers. And if you've got a smaller population having to feed more people, they just don't have time. I tried to get some farmers to come here. It's planting season. It's not possible.
I would also agree that one of the problems is indeed, as the lady who asked the question brought up, that most consumers have no idea how hard it is to grow food and to produce food, and how much work it is, and how you are exposed to pests, weather, you name it. Whatever can destroy your, one hail shower can destroy your harvest in 2 minutes, and the same can happen via fungus or some other pest. And that's really not there in general understanding. I mean, how to change that? Maybe urban gardening, even though it will probably not feed the world, but it might help people to understand how difficult it is to actually grow food and reward the work and the input of the farmers. And another thing, to come back again to what Alan said, I agree very much with him. I was recently at an event organized by one of the big companies, but also in conversations with some of my visitors, farmers who came to say that they find it extremely hard when they want to do crop rotation, which is one of the easiest ways of fighting many pests, to find markets for the intermittent crops. So what they do is they go back to the one that brings them the biggest profits in much shorter cycles than they would like to, simply because there is no market and no adequate price for the intermittent crops. And here everybody is called on, again, the food industry in developing new products that can use these intermittent crops. Even famous celebrity chefs or others who could come up with recipes using these kind of crops that are at the moment clearly undervalued. And that would already help also to shift the agricultural production.
Hubert, do you want to put a period on the end of this conversation about the kid that doesn't know where milk comes from?
I can try. I wonder if the urban population has interest in anything that is being produced outside farming. So is anybody interested how their Apple iPhone is produced? So I understand the question, but I think it's a more general attitude towards any produce. But somehow we consider food to be something different. And in particular, urban populations don't have any concern about the environment when it concerns their own environment, but it's up to the farmer to take care of all of this. And I just wonder, is there any other sector in primary, of course, farming, but secondary or even tertiary sector which is held to the same environmental standards as the primary production sector? And I'm not saying these are not justifiable, but I think, it's a bit easy to blame somebody else, and I think we need to also educate ourselves as to, well, the cities in the first place, could be a nice protected environment, but that's never part of the conversation. I don't know if I put an exclamation mark or a period after.
You did a ... Hello, stand up so we can see you. Who's got the microphone? Over there. And looking completely the wrong direction because you weren't standing up. Fantastic. Put it closer to your mouth and then go for it.
Hi, so I work in the UK in one of the more deprived areas, and unsurprisingly an area that was very strongly vote leave. And kind of one of the things that we see regularly is that people don't see any value in the work that we do. That would be from farmers producing the food, pesticide makers producing the company, the government trying to regulate. They just see it as all red tape, and that kind of is where the system. So is there a role that we need to take to be more proactive in kind of justifying our own existence?
Of course. Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I met recently groups of young farmers who were in their education, and one of the young farmers brought up exactly this question, and I said what I say now. Yes, you have to engage with society at large, with consumer organizations, with the NGOs also, to explain, to understand them better. And here I agree again with Sophie that we often try to remain in our own comfort zones without really engaging with the others. Because if farmers cannot convince society and then indirectly politicians that what they do and how they do it is valuable and should be valued, then they have a hard time. And likewise, they need to be ready to change, also to respond to these demands from society.
I think one of the challenges we have, of course, is that it's not simply a farmer going and getting the message out. He's competing or she's competing against a large marketing machine that's trying to sell food at a higher price. And by selling food at a higher price, normally creating premium products, and the whole retail chain is interested in that, which is why organic food has become so popular today, because it's not a question of a lifestyle so much as a purpose-driven approach to essentially a complex marketing practice. And that creates a rather strong lobby against the conventional farmer. So we have a virtuous picture of an organic farmer and a picture of somebody in a hazmat suit as a conventional farmer. And this double standard has become quite difficult for the food chain to be able to reconcile when you consider how much food is grown via organic farming compared to traditional farming. Conventional farming, sorry.
To come back to the question, the thing which will never work, is to approach a conversation with someone who is that far away from you with that objective, the objective of kind of proving your own rights of existence, because they don't care. The only thing that works, in my experience, to bridge that huge gap is to move to them. So you should go with the question, what do you care about? Is there anything I can do to help you with the things that you're struggling with? And you might not get much out of that conversation at first, but what you can do, but it's a very long-term strategy, is develop a positive relationship. And this way, like, because of the friends that I have, I find myself quite often in conversations with, for instance, anti-vaxxers. And the one thing that never works is try to convince them. It just doesn't work. So the only thing that I try to achieve for now is, can we come to identify where we disagree? And why do you have your reasons to make your choices, and why do I have my reasons? And once we can do that in a friendly kind of discussion, we might move to the next step. And I have convinced some people to vaccinate their children. So that's a way to approach it. It is a long-term strategy. That's all you can do. First, establish a positive relationship, and only then they might start to trust you and to actually listen to you.
If you have the red microphone, please stand up. Hello.
I'm Doug Wolf with Syngenta Crop Protection, a senior scientist there. And it's an interesting conversation. Prior to Syngenta, I was at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, so I kind of understand both sides here. But I'm glad you brought up the vaccine question, because I think that is a critical thing that we're ignoring. How do we prevent the same thing happening in agriculture, a catastrophe that we're looking at with measles epidemics and other preventable diseases? So we had a highly successful, safe program of preventing disease in children that up until 2000 we didn't see measles in the world, and now we have over 100,000 cases this year alone in children dying from a preventable disease. And I wonder if that's just a victim of its own success. Agriculture and crop protection industry and the way we do farming has been tremendous success over the past 50, 80 years. Safer products on the market all the time. How do we not succumb to our own success and end up in this catastrophe because of fear and unable to convince others that this is really a safe and viable a way of producing food for our populations?
I've been involved in many of these debates because I find similar lines in the risk perception approach to both vaccines and not just pesticides, but also seed technology and the ability to innovate seed solutions to augment agricultural applications. And the problem is that there are really many similarities. I refer to them as natural paths. In fact, I think most of us have some sister-in-law somewhere at Christmas that we have to endure through a dinner where they're talking about these issues. But I think one of the things that we've got to realize is that if you put nature as acceptable and anything man-made synthetic as difficult or unacceptable, you're going to get these problems. And as an affluent society can afford to take those risks if we have eradicated measles or we have no longer food scarcity issues. But it comes to a science communication challenge for me, and it's just give me a second to explain this. With the anti-vax, I think it's the science communication community that has failed in vaccines. Because if I'm a young parent and I'm going to have to make a decision to vaccinate my children, and I go to a scientist and they will say, just vaccinate, don't you dare do anything else, because don't you know that you're going to lose the herd immunity, and don't be stupid. Or then I'll go to somebody, a guru on social media who sells supplements and makes his living very well. They'll say, well, I understand your problem, I'm a parent too. Which person would the parent feel more comfortable with? So we have to learn from that we cannot scare people into doing things that they feel may or may not, they feel vulnerable and we're not giving them solutions. So I think within the whole crop protection seed science approach, we have to understand the vulnerability of people and not scare them into thinking that we're going to have famine in developing countries or we're going to have these pests rising up. We have to have them engage in a more responsible manner. And that's hard when you realize that you're speaking with somebody who could be very destructive for the good of society.
I completely agree with that, but I did not really agree with the question because it assumes that the current system is perfect as it is. And the reason why I moved away from what I do and why I moved towards what I do now is not because some anti-science people convinced me. It's because in trying to defend biotechnology, I started seeing its flaws. And so I started seeing what's wrong with the current agricultural system as well. And that's the thing that I'm trying to, at a very small scale, trying to tackle as well. And that is what I kept seeing time after time in my previous job at Sense About Science, where we were promoting to scientists to talk to citizens. A lot of them came out of those conversations not with the feeling that they had taught something. They came out of them with the feeling that they had learned something. Even though they didn't disagree with the people, and those people were clearly less informed than they were and less expert, those people came with different ways of looking at things. They gave them ideas for new research questions. They drew them out of the tunnel vision that they often have. And I'm sorry, but our science education puts us into a tunnel, and it's really hard to break out of that. And so you gain a lot by talking to people. You actually learn a bit about yourself as well. And if you open up for that, you might be a bit self-critical and notice that perhaps you were not as smart as you thought you were, and perhaps you've been asking the wrong questions, or perhaps there are better questions to ask, which science right now is not asking.
Can I complicate the discussion one further knot? As though it's, because this is why these are intractable issues. I mean, I've talked about climate change, I've talked about biodiversity loss, we've got an agricultural industry that's propped up with public subsidy because it's operating on such low margins, it's practically collapsing without them. That's another problem. But here's another problem, is that part of the distrust, and it comes out, I mean, on the vaccination story, but it certainly comes out in the pesticide story, is there's an incipient anti-capitalism out there, which certain groups in society, which are absolutely entitled to hold these views, feel very strongly about. And the fact that these products, we've driven the production of these products into an even more concentrated situation because the costs of the regulatory costs are so high, very few companies can assemble the resources to go about the invention and discovery process and take it through the regulatory process. But it means that it's a very easy target to say this is global multinationals who are only in it for profit, as though that's an evil in and of itself. And there's plenty of people who sign up to that agenda. And given the outfall from the financial crisis, and who took the rap for that, it wasn't the bankers who caused the problem, it was everybody else who was dependent on public support. It's no wonder that this system is not held in high regard, and therefore anybody running with any discontent is absolutely at liberty to blame Brussels, blame regulators, blame the government, blame the parliament, without suggesting what to put in its place. But that issue of competition policy is yet another difficult to solve element of this problem that we're gripping here, or trying to grip here.
If you've been listening to this conversation and been thinking, in a minute I am going to ask a question, you only have 14 minutes left to do so. The microphones are there and there. Put your hand up if you'd like a microphone to come to you. But I want to go to Klaus, because I'm really curious. You're a chemist, so you're a scientist. You're also a pesticide regulator. Isn't that a bit like being a schizophrenic?
And I'm also a farmer. I mean, I grew up on I grew up on a farm. So
how do you go through your day? Is that why you said your day was so chaotic? Because one side is saying this, and then the scientist is saying this, and then it must be hell.
Well, let's put it like this. The hell, or the madness, as I called it in the beginning, is not so much that you have to deal with different views and opinions. That's normal in such a position. It's just the amount and the mass of it that is happening every day. And the urgency always behind it. Who
makes the bigger decision? Is it the scientist in you that makes the bigger, like the most important decision? Is it the farmer?
It's the rational person who is...
Is that the scientist then?
Who is translating...
Yes.
Well, I would claim I am. But that is who is translating the scientific findings from EFSA and the member states into a regulatory decision. And
that sounds like somebody from the EU.
That is my daily...
That is not a proper answer.
Well, if you let me continue. And that works up to a certain extent. Okay. At a certain moment, then other factors come into play. And the Council and the Parliament, when they put our regulation into place, they knew that, and they put a nice catch-all word in there. Other legitimate factors to the matter shall also be taken into account in our decision-making.
You read that from a paper.
And that is in my regulation, which I happen to know. And obviously, that's what we do. I mean, we live in a real world, not in an ideal world. And where is all this fear that David mentioned coming from? And where is the hostility to vaccination coming from? It's coming from science, because somebody published a study finding something or claiming to have found something, and that becomes then a self-fulfilling prophecy by being taken over by others, by taken over by journalists. I mean, the media play a very, very big role in all of this. Any study coming out somewhere saying something negative is immediately amplified through the media. Enormously amplified. If a study comes out that finds something positive or finds nothing, if it ever gets published, because in the scientific community that's also a big problem, that studies finding nothing are rarely, if ever, published. So you have a huge bias in the scientific literature in that direction. And when I was a researcher at university, I was also mega disappointed when my experiments didn't deliver any result. But that should also be published, because otherwise we always get this biased information. And negativity is hugely amplified, whilst positivity, or as Hubert said, there are some studies out there recently from Wallonia and from the Netherlands showing that indeed exposure of operators or of residents and bystanders is very low to pesticides. They are never mentioned anywhere. Never.
I know there's a question. Hold tight with that question. Hubert, there was a story that you told us as a group as we were getting ready for this plenary, and it was about the European Food Safety Agency. I'm just jumping off the media idea that you brought up, Klaus, where a letter bomb was delivered. Tell us that story, because it also talks to the activism and the extremism that is also out there around this topic area.
Yeah, this has to do with the GMO panel, where a letter was received by EFSA addressed to one of the panel members, and it looked a bit suspicious because the panel member never received any mail through EFSA. It was only through the home institution, and luckily the people in the postal office at EFSA found it suspicious, called him up. He said, well, this isn't what I expect, and so they gave it to the police, and eventually they detonated it. You would expect that this would be in the media a lot, but in fact it wasn't, and so I find that actually a double shame, because it's again suppressing information which doesn't fit. And so for an organization like EFSA, if we even have our experts being threatened physically, you know, this goes a bit farther than the so-called argumentum ad hominem, because here you're really ad hominem, then what on earth is this world about?
Hello.
Hi, Philippe from Australia, but I'm French, as you can recognize with my accent. I dislike very much the opposition between organic farming and the rest. And I think I would like to ask EU and the regulators to do something, because in organic farming, a lot of chemicals are being used because they are authorized, and those are very old chemistry, usually very, very nasty chemistry. So is there an opportunity to revise what organic farming can use in terms of chemicals, and impose on organic farming, which would be good, the same standards in terms of chemistry? And that may help anybody and consumers to understand that the new chemistry that are coming from the industry, should be used by organic farming, because they are more environmentally friendly, they are safer products. So I think regulators have a key role in terms of educating everybody. So I'd like to hear your opinion on that.
Yes, absolutely. And I only partly agree with what you said, because it is indeed correct that organic farming uses pesticides, which is not known everywhere and by everybody. I mean, many people assume there are none used at all. But they can only use a subset of those substances that are approved for conventional agriculture. So I would take a little bit issue with your statement that they use substances that are worse than the ones in conventional farming. It's a subset, and some of them are indeed very old, and you can wonder whether they should be used at all, either in organic farming or in conventional farming for that matter. That said, I would also not put all my hopes on chemistry for the future. What we see, and I think that's a very good tendency, that about half of the applications for new substances to be brought to the market are microorganisms or biopesticides or substances of natural origin. So the industry has clearly understood this demand from society and from the farming sectors to have such solution and more of these solutions available. And we are working at the moment to facilitate that trend further by adapting even better the scientific assessment procedures and data requirements for doing that, because at the moment they are indeed quite difficult, in particular for smaller companies who are active in this sector.
I would like to add that a risk assessment is a risk assessment, and I think I want to caution against saying, well, we're going to give you a soft treatment and this is the normal treatment, and you're a small company so you get a better risk assessment deal than a big company. I think we have to be extremely cautious in the communication about that. A risk assessment is a risk assessment.
True, but for a microorganism, it should be done differently than for chemicals.
I think we have to be careful here about what we determine as a risk assessment. And this is one of the challenges I have, is that it'll take in the EU, it'll take about 10 days for a new innovative twist to an iPhone to be approved. 10 days to regulate some new feature of an iPhone. It'll take 10 years on average for a new pesticide to be allowed on the market.
Can an iPhone kill you?
Yes, actually, the problem is if people start getting tumors suddenly on the left side of their brain in a large number, we're really not sure what will happen. And the question is, well, can pesticides kill you? The same question. The question is the dose that makes the poison over a period of time. Now, I don't want to get everyone scared about their phones in this case, but the point is the regulatory approach is not the same. And the point is, it's not a rational system. If the public wants something, then the regulators are going to have pressure to push it through.
Because they see a benefit. Everybody sees a benefit in using an iPhone.
So we have to
or a smartphone.
We have to be very careful when we talk about regulators that we think it's a rational process. It is very much beholden by what the public wants and reactive to what the public wants. And we have to realize there are double
Klaus
standards.
says it's his rational brain that always perseveres.
Can I ask David?
Just very quickly, because I want one more question in here. We've got 6 minutes
Are you arguing
left.
to toughen the iPhone regulation?
No,
or
not
the
at all.
smartphone regulation, or to slacken the
It's to have a
regulation?
more rational process. I think
it's very rational to look very carefully at products that are going to be applied to the whole land surface many times per year, year in, year out, decade in, decade out.
And designed to have effects on living organisms.
To be toxic to certain
well,
organisms.
but then you can find a lot of other examples, for example, emissions for automotive applications as well, or to new applications for electric cars. And we don't apply, if the public has a strong demand for something, the regulator bows to the public demand. If there's a strong demand
and what's
against
wrong
something,
with that, David? After all, we are living in a democracy.
Yes, but we're also dealing
Not a
with
technocracy.
But we're also, but we're dealing with scientists who should consider these things within the basic scientific parameters.
That might be so, but ultimately, in a democracy, the majority view decides. I mean, scientists and technocrats can say what they want, and I mean, the Commission is always accused of being a gray-faced, bureaucratic technocracy. No, that's not the case.
Well,
We've seen it for GMOs in Europe. And one of my slogans that I use in conversations often is also pesticides at the moment are on the way of becoming the new GMOs.
But we have farmers who are unfortunately not a democratically well-represented part of the population who do need these things. And we have to consider our responsibility to these farmers
Society
as well.
will say to that, I mean, we've gone through all these arguments, we pay the farmers a lot of money.
Exactly.
And Alan has explained that very well.
We pay them to fail.
And therefore,
These two are like a symphony playing, beautiful voices. Thank you so much. Good afternoon.
Yes, I have experience trying to get biological products, biocontrol, biopesticides through the EU, and it is hell to
I
do
agree.
so.
Yeah.
It costs multi-millions of dollars and can be 5 to 10 years, but the EU has restricted and eliminated hundreds of active ingredients. And consumers want alternatives, so the problem is yours to fix. So I was at a EU meeting not long ago with every commodity group in the EU representing every single crop, minor crop. And they asked me after my talk, what can we do? And I said, farmers need to protest. And they said, well, should we dump trucks of tomatoes on Brussels steps, Parliament steps? And I said, probably so. So there has never been an environmental or human health incident in 70 years of the use of biocontrol products since BT was first commercialized. So the process here in Europe is not in line with the rest of the world in terms of the risk.
And yet, as you said yourself, we have restricted the highest number of substances of any other jurisdiction. If you compare the numbers that are still available here and therefore make room for new products, compared to, for example, the US, we are, I think, at 50% of what is available there. And Hubert, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was EFSA who told us that in particular for BT, the residue side, there are some concerns that we need to investigate, that everybody needs to investigate, because we don't want to have another consumer scare because of residues of microorganisms or the metabolites that they produce in food, which would also not be well perceived and would undermine the trust in such alternative solutions again. So it needs to be checked. But I'm with you that for the moment, what we have in the regulation, which is coming from the earlier directive, is not up to date and needs to urgently be revised, and we are working on that right now, together with the industry associations and member states and other stakeholders.
I've really enjoyed spending time with you. I don't know if you said the most important thing this afternoon yet, so I'm going to give you that opportunity. It is going to be a single sentence. It can be 2 if you want. Something that will get everybody standing up and applauding you like it's the best thing they've heard at any IUPAC ever. David!
Oh, geez, I didn't even have time to think. The problem today, I think, is that we're looking for simple solutions to complex problems, and we're dealing with it in a complex network. Whether there are the American tort lawyers making money suing a company and creating fear, whether it's alternative marketing strategies for food that's considered as clean, whether you've got competitors trying to outdo each other. You've got complex problems, but everyone wants simple solutions.
Klaus?
Well, to pick up on something that Alan said at the very beginning, something needs to change, because at the moment, indeed, all stakeholders are unhappy with the current system. And in one of the debates or discussions at our standing committee, when somebody said, Mr. Chairman, I cannot make you happy, then I said, don't worry, the concept of happiness has long left my professional life. And there he said something very right. We need to think about a different system, and much bigger than only pesticides. It's the entire system of food production that needs to change. Also to give the value and the recognition to farmers that they deserve, and to society back what it expects from all of that. So new business models are needed, also for the pesticides industry as such. And at another event, probably a year ago, one idea that was floated was, don't sell volume of substance or product, sell hectare protected surface. And you think about the best way how to do that. And that can also include accepting a certain loss of yield and not intervening, paying compensation, insurance schemes, you name it. I mean, this is something that the chemical industry has also done in certain areas, in the industrial side. And why should that not be possible also on this side?
Sophie, the most amazing thing you've said today is about to come out of your mouth.
High
pressure.
High pressure, yeah. If you really want the public to hear what you're trying to tell them, start by listening yourself.
You nailed it.
Thank you.
Alan?
Well, Klaus took the one I was going to throw out, which is we've got in this room hundreds of the brightest thinkers in crop protection in Europe and the world. The challenge is exactly as he said. Is there a service economy? Is there a different way of looking at providing the service of crop protection than, in a sense, at the moment we're relying on Sustainable Use Directive, integrated pest management, where we only use these synthetics as a last resort. There isn't a farmer out there who says, I'm already doing that and I'm still using pesticides at the same rate as I was. Is there a way of turning this upside down? Come out for it and with it and you'll be world famous.
Hubert, I'm convinced you're the most optimistic person on this panel.
I would say that the focus so far has been on the risk assessment pre-market, and now it's necessary to move the focus of science post-market, and that is a great opportunity to show that you care about your customers. So it's a business opportunity as well as, I think, an opportunity to show leadership.
Nicely done. If you are going on the boat trip, you have 12 minutes to get outside. Your guide is waiting for you, so you have enough time to thank your panel. Thank you.